We are thrilled to have Clay here today. We had a great chat, content call setting up this session, and we're going to talk through talking about Walmart's digital transformation. We're going to talk about a lot of the different initiatives that Walmart's been working on. Clay has some slides we're going to click through as we have our discussion. Okay. We're going to talk about different ways Walmart's testing technologies, and maybe a little bit, if we have time, about your background and your perspective on retail.
That'd be good.
So, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, let's get started. So, we know that you've been working on a digital transformation at Walmart, and you're describing it as it's centered around people, which is great. Can you talk about the strategies and implementations that are comprising this digital transformation? And one of the things I know you're working on is the rollout of Facebook Workplace and the My Productivity app.
Yep. Thanks, Debbie. Nice to meet you in person.
Yeah.
And happy to be here. Appreciate everybody joining this morning. It's interesting because you hear a lot of people across the industry talking about digital transformation, right? And I think you hear a lot of that. You hear the other buzzwords like AI and ML, which we'll talk a little bit about in a minute. But the digital transformation is interesting. One of the things we've coined at Walmart that we talk about is it's people-led, tech-empowered. Okay. I think that's an important statement, people-led, tech-empowered, because it's not the other way around. A lot of companies try to infuse it the other way around where it becomes tech-led and then people after the fact. We're really putting people at the front of this. And we certainly, the digital transformation, the way I think about it is if you look back in time, I'd say probably 500 years ago, the pace of change was happening only every probably 100 years, right? You saw big changes happen, and then as it entered the 1900s, you saw changes starting to happen every decade. And what you're starting to see now is changes are happening at least every 6 months, and it really started around back in the 90s when the iPhone and other technology was starting to become relevant, and then it became released in later. In this pace of technology is rapidly changing the way we work. From all the artificial intelligence, the way we shop, the way consumers' behavior is and everything, it's unbelievable. So what we're trying to do internally and externally as we look at our customer set is how do we change and keep up with that pace of change? Because it is happening very fast, and a lot of companies aren't used to reacting that quickly. And I think if you look, over the last 15 years, there's a lot of companies that just disappeared. I think a lot of it's because they weren't able to keep up with that pace of change. You take, easy case to take is like look at Blockbuster, right? They were actually able to make a pivot once, right, from VHS to DVD, but they weren't able to make the other pivot to online streaming. So you see a lot of companies do make a few, but they never make them all. So it's important for companies to continue to change, iterate, and keep up with it. And I think now with the infusion of technology and the rapid pace of change, people have to transform. But it's not just transforming the external view of how we think about like the customer, because that is important, but it's how we change the internal, how people work. What you've seen is a lot of the consumer-grade technology now is outpaced business. Everybody remembers probably 10 or 15 years ago when you come into work, it was like, great, I got a good computer, everything I need's here. Now it's the other way around. Right. The stuff used in your personal lives are actually better than what you have at work in most cases. So we're trying to really change the way people operate and work. And I think you mentioned Workplace as an example, right? The things we're trying to do is infuse a lot of the consumer-grade technology into the business and change how people work, putting data at their fingertips so they can make decisions. So
I'm sure probably on a lot of people's minds here, how at an organization as large as Walmart and been around a long time, how do you accomplish that? Where do you start? And maybe talk a little bit about what have been some of the challenges along the way.
Yeah, it's it can't be completely grassroots, right? I mean, I think part of it is, but a lot of it's nearly a top-down mandate. So I'll give you a good example. So we have this digital transformation office that the CEO leads up. We meet once a month for an hour and a half. It's sponsored by the CEO of the company, Doug, and it's myself and all the executive members on his leadership team. As we were going through this presentation recently, one of the things we started talking about is changing how people work. And we had all this different terminology on the slide. It had stuff like DevOps, it had Agile, it had all these different terms. And somebody in the room's like, hey, we need to put these in business terms. Doug stopped and says, no, we actually need to change that the other way around, and we need to teach the business technology terms.
Okay.
So I thought that was you think about that right there is a powerful statement that really rolls down, and people need to change how they work. I've never seen that before, and I say that's getting a chance to come from a lot of different companies, but being top-led like this is super important for the transformation to get going.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about that for several years now, breaking down those silos in the organizations and getting, the CIO to work together with the CMO and having the CEO involved has to be pivotal in the process. But you have to be, both sides have to be talking the same language.
They do.
Right? Yeah. So.
Yeah, but I do think it's interesting the fact that now it's a complete flip, right? It's hey, let's get the business to learn tech, because it is becoming important around a lot of the models that we're pushing around, mobility, DevOps, Agile, all those kind of things, where it's a different view.
How do the business folks feel about that?
They actually like it,
Yeah,
especially the business leaders we have, Greg Friend, who leads our U.S. business, and then John Ferner, who leads the SAM side, then Judith, who leads international. They actually welcome that. Like, they're ready to, they know that technology is a foundational element, but obviously they're the people first, but the technology element is so key for us to continue to compete. And like I said earlier, that pace of change is happening so quick, we got to be able to keep up with it and start to infuse that technology and change how people work internally.
Was there a learning curve for Doug and for you in the process?
I would say there's definitely been a learning curve for a lot of people in the business. It's been interesting because a lot of it's spent some time in kind of like nearly teaching some of the stuff, but they're obviously quick learners and understand that technology is the key. I think a lot of it is making sure that the tech teams don't always talk just technology terminology, but make sure they put it in a story so they can actually relate to it. Not saying they shouldn't understand tech terms like DevOps and all those things, which Doug is pushing, but making sure that you put it in terms where people can actually understand is important.
Yeah, storytelling is key. Yeah. A lot of people are talking about that. Is there anything during the process that you feel like you should have or could have done differently?
I would, anytime you look back and kind of the Monday morning quarterback situation, you never can move fast enough. And every time you make those I'm not really sure if we should do this. 6 months later, you'll look back on it and say, I should have done that earlier or sooner. And I think it's the model. One of the things that we're trying to promote, I'm pushing, is really the fail fast model. To iterate quickly, try things out. We've tried Workplace out. It's and people at first were like, well, we're not really sure. And I just said, look, let's just put it out there and see what happens. And I think it was, people were hesitant at first, but it became nearly a viral situation where people just ended up coming to it to collaborate. So you got to try things out, and the things that don't work, you got to be willing to stop. And a lot of people don't, and that's what runs. You get like 20,000 different initiatives going on. So it's kind of the iterate, fail fast, and just continue to push that.
Yeah. So with Facebook Workplace, how did you choose that solution? And when you talk about failing fast, did you test it in small groups first?
Yeah, we started testing it out in a few different groups. One, my own group, because I figured if I'm rolling this thing out, I want to make sure people were able to utilize it or use it. And what I found, it was simple to use. It's like the one that's we use for personal life. People at first were, as we started rolling out, people were nearly caught on, and then what happened was everybody wanted to access the thing. And we started using it for collaboration, and when you have an organization that's spread out and so big, it's like, how do you get where people can collaborate? Email distributions don't work anymore. Like, if anybody's got email distributions problems in here, I'm sure there's hands would go up. You can't distribute information to a large organization in an efficient manner because things always change. People don't read emails. At least you can put things in there and share the content people can consume as they want to, or not consume, but it's a way they can always go look. What we found was as we expanded that into some of our stores, it actually created competition between the different stores, because what happened is the managers in certain stores would post like, hey, take a look what I've done creative in the store, and then everybody's trying to one-up him.
Yeah,
and it's just like, so it's kind of creating some interesting things there, but it's, we have a lot of people on it now, and it's definitely an interesting platform. One of the things that we've discovered as a byproduct is actually idea generation. We've actually allowed people to come and submit ideas, because one of the things you always hear from employees in your organization is hey, how do they heard? They got great ideas, but nobody's listening, or they're getting bubbled up and they're stopped somewhere in that frozen middle. And this is a way that we're actually able to generate ideas. We created a campaign called Value Makers, where we allowed people to submit ideas, and we had actually 200 ideas across the company in just a few days. And what I did is I took the top 5, and then we narrowed them down, picked the top 3, and we're implementing those.
That's awesome. So
Yeah.
it came from all different titles throughout.
All different titles, from part-time to hourly to people being in the company for 30 years. Just amazing. And some of them you looked at and it's like, wow, that's Captain Obvious. Like, I should have done
Yeah,
that.
right.
But they're really simple. And the fact is, people just weren't getting heard because there was nowhere for them to voice their opinion or bring up their ideas.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Are there any other results, before we move on, any other results that you want to talk about around Facebook Messenger, the My Productivity app?
Yeah, there's another app we rolled out. It's called My Productivity, which was, it goes back to, we wanted to put the data at the fingertips of the people running our operation. So everybody's got all these big legacy systems, from SAP to Oracles and all this stuff like that. But when you're out on the road or you're out in the store, it's like really, really hard to access. You either got to go back to a computer or some other way. What we did, so we put a mobile front end on it, where now they have this thing called My Productivity. So you can see real-time sales for that store, for that region. Basically, everything's happening in real time. It's fed into the mobile app, and they can go in and look at the operation real time and see who's worked that day, the sales, the revenue. Everything's right there at their fingertips now, versus going back and looking at it. So took the legacy and really just put more of into a mobile format, so people could get it at any point in time.
And who has access to that?
All the people that run the operations, be like store managers, managers that run the regions and districts, and then obviously the CEO and CFO, stuff like that. So,
Okay.
But not everybody has access to it because there's a lot of sensitive information on it.
Okay, got it. All right, let's move on and talk a little bit about some initiatives that you've been working on, excuse me, around artificial intelligence.
Yep.
I know that's on everybody's mind.
Yeah, that was another buzzword you hear a lot
Yeah,
of people talk about. What I always hear is key things. I hear AI, ML, machine learning, and then you hear a lot around RPA, robotics processing,
Okay.
right? And there are some distinctions between the two. I mean, we're doing a lot. I'll start with RPA because I think it's I think RPA is nearly the foundation element to some of these components that we're actually working on.
Okay.
So some of the RPA stuff we're doing, we're trying to, hey, how do you automate a lot of the work that actually people are doing? And if you even look back just a few years ago, the tools weren't sophisticated enough to be able to tie into a lot of your legacy systems. It could be mainframe or a lot of your older ERP systems. So at least these new RPA tools allow you to orchestrate a lot of that automation layer. So you extrapolate nearly the cumbersome work that people are doing. And then you get into the question of, right, hey, well, what's happening to everybody's jobs, right? Because now you're automating the work. And what we've seen is actually nearly an upskill where people are actually wanting to get trained on a lot more of the RPA. They're like, I was in one of the shared service centers, which is kind of the other part of my job where we run a lot of the operational piece. And I remember a lady coming up to me and she goes, hey, I'm tired of doing all this manual work. I would love to help automate it. And she goes, I'm the one that knows the processes better than anybody. And that really started to click with me when she said that. And we actually have taken her, and she's helping through a lot of the RPA stuff. And if you look at RPA, it's not like you need a programming degree or anything like that to do it. It's very simple. And you can just string the work together if you know what the process is. And a lot of people that have been doing it for a long time understand the processes. So you don't need to actually be a programmer or something like that. You can take people that understand the business flow and hook into the different areas. So doing a lot with RPA. We launched 500 kind of the bots last year to take out a lot of the manual work and try to move people to a lot of the higher value work where they're focused more on competitive advantage and other things versus just doing tedious routine work. So that's kind of that first layer. The other one's artificial intelligence. This is where you get into a lot of people, like you hear a lot of people talking about it, but they're actually doing it. We're actually doing it in a few different cases. We're doing a lot with search, but there's an interesting use case that we're doing actually in our stores, and it's around IoT. So what we're doing is we're taking a lot of the IoT data out of the stores, and me coming from manufacturing world, first I came as like IoT, how does IoT work in retail? Like I couldn't completely grasp it. But if you look at a store footprint or anything in that manner, you'll see there's a lot of things where you can improve a lot of the operational efficiencies there, right? So think about food spoilage, right? So if you think about sensors on freezers, you think about sensors on dock doors where they leave them open, the heat's flowing out the back. You think about the big one we're looking at is around energy consumption. With our footprint in the U.S., our energy bills are extremely high. So we're a large consumer of energy. So we're like, how do we use IoT and artificial intelligence to start to create a better, not just lower the bill, but create a greener environment, around sustainability. And what we've started doing is tapping into a lot of the different things. So if you look at so taking the other part, kind of like computer vision, can you look at the traffic in the store and see where it is, and can you adjust the temperature so where there's a lot of people in one part of the store where it could be hot, you might want to lower the temperature a little bit. And then you start looking at like energy pricing on the grid, and you look at like the humidity outside, and you take all those factors in, and how do you really get the appropriate temperature? And just a few degrees up or down can make a big impact to energy consumption when you're talking about just in the U.S. our 5,000 stores. So we're doing a lot there, and we're trying to get it where there's no human interaction at all. And that's really where the AI comes into, is letting the machine make the decision versus right now there's a lot of dashboards that's out there and people are trying to manually make these decisions. It's impossible when you're looking at 5,000 stores. So how do you make the decisions and let the machine make them, knowing that you're going to confidently do them and do them the right way versus, turning up the heat when it should be cooled.
Right.
But also the refrigeration piece is like being able to trigger, right now our food spoilage and across our stores is pretty big, and obviously you never want to waste food. And being able to get the dispatch to get there to be able to repair the freezer real time is super important. Right now, alarms go off, and when you're running 5,000 stores, you get like alarms all the time. Letting that machine make the decision and automatically dispatch to get the part repaired. So we're starting to do a lot of the AI internally, and then we're also applying it a lot externally to our search engines and a few other things.
So back to the beginning of this conversation, good advice for people who are working in the companies is to, don't bury your head in the sand when it comes to all these new technologies.
Yeah.
Think about how you can participate in the process, and then, then maybe you won't lose your job. So, that's, definitely good advice from there. And so with the AI, and some of these other technologies, it sounds like you've really taken more of a practical approach to it. And I think that that's a lot of the challenge with a lot of retailers. And you hear a lot of, sexy talk about, what AI can do in the customer-facing ways and some of the other technologies in IoT. But there's a lot to be said for the practical applications and thinking about, how you can improve business processes, making the customers more comfortable in the store while saving energy.
Yep.
A lot of good initiatives, around how to better think about some of these technologies rather than, I think a lot of retailers are overwhelmed by not knowing, where to begin with them. And
there's so many new technologies coming
Yeah.
out. I mean, we're headquartered in Bentonville, and we just recently opened some offices in Austin and Dallas, trying to tap into a lot more of the talent. It is a very, very fast-growing area. I was in Israel last week looking at a lot of the startups. If anybody's read, I think it's Startup Nation, looking at the Israel and how they actually handle a lot of their startups and infusion technology. I think we met with 30 startups in a few days. And what was interesting was the theme was very clear. It was AI, ML, mobile AV/AR, computer vision, NPL, RPA. Everything that you hear on the paper is actually, like, when we were there, you could feel it. So many companies focused on it.
Yeah.
Some were great and some were not, but that's the startup world, right? That's the thing they're trying to get into. And phenomenal, just absolutely phenomenal technologies coming out of a lot of the companies and what people are actually getting to. And that goes back to the pace of change. I think it's going to start happening even quicker as these companies start infusing more technology.
How do you make decisions about whether or not to get involved with some of those startups? I mean, you think they're really cool. Mm-hmm. Some of them are going to fail. Others aren't. So how do you decide to take the chance?
Yep. So, give you examples. The 30 plus that we met with. What we did is afterward, we had myself and a group of other people there. We actually narrowed it down to 6 that we want to work with, and then we'll probably end up working with about 3. Mm-hmm. But 6 that we really liked, that we thought, hey, this is some technology that we could potentially look at for. Could be the future of how people shop. It could be some things that we're doing internally around, could be RPA or AI. So it's a very disciplined process because all 30 look good when you first see them. They're like, yeah, they look good. Yeah. But can you get them to actually scale? Can you work with them? There's no way you have the bandwidth to do all that. So you got to really be conscious and careful. We did it last year. So this is our second iteration with that. We also do a lot in Silicon Valley too, and doing some more in Austin, but also tapping the global market at the same time.
Now, I know we have actually a speaker, Farina Contractor, who's focused on innovation out of Walmart Canada. But do you have a focused innovation team? Who are the executives who are involved in these ventures?
Yep. So one was with us, and we purposely put the innovation team and put it in the business. The innovation team shouldn't be in tech, because all they'll come up with is new technologies. It's not always the case to solve the problem. We actually have the person that was leading it was with us in Israel, because I think when you look at it from their side is from a business, how do they adopt the technology, or is there a better way to do it from a process standpoint versus always trying to solve it with a new piece of technology? So we put that purposely in the business, and I think it's important. Not saying that you shouldn't work with the tech teams, but having it over there is actually changed the game for us.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah.
I think we talked a little bit about your testing strategy. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention about how you're able to launch tests quickly? Any best practices or lessons learned from that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the goes back to, I'm one of those people that it's a fail fast model, and I think these are four things that I always think about. I always keep at the top of my mind. But fail fast is so important because, like I said, that pace of change has happened so fast. You have to be willing, as leaders or as peers in an organization, to feel comfortable that people are going to fail. Like, so if you do 10 things and 9 work and 1 fail, it's okay. Obviously, you got to take risk mitigation to make sure the wrong one's not something like closing the books or something with cyber. But letting people go out there and iterate and fail, I think that's the way you get the innovation. And getting that model to work, it's not that easy as it sounds. Like, yeah, let's just all go do fail fast, and people start working on things and they don't work. It's a culture change. It's a complete culture shift.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how much of a culture change that was at Walmart. And we know from, startup e-commerce companies, they're more nimble and able to do that out of the box. But, at Walmart, it had to be a pretty significant culture change.
Yeah, I think it is. But we also have bought a lot of startups over the last, couple of years. So that idea has been kind of starting to be infused into the broader ecosystem. But yeah, anywhere you go, I wouldn't say it's Walmart, I think it's anywhere. I mean, even when I was at GE, when they were pushing a lot of more of the, really the startup mentality in the different business units, I mean, it took a while for it to actually catch on and people felt comfortable with it. Because the first time somebody did fail something, they thought, well, what's going to happen to me? Yeah. And the key is to highlight that. Like, actually call that person out and say, hey, look, they actually tried it out. It didn't work, but they actually tried something. Yeah. And that's the key.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, so before we go to Q&A, because I'm sure we have some questions in the audience, just fill us in a little bit on, and you talk a little bit about your work at GE. Your background is not in retail. What has the transition been like for you? And if what kind of learnings have you brought to the table at Walmart from your previous experience?
Yeah, I actually started my career in the military. So I started in the Coast Guard, went to college, and no idea what I wanted to do. So woke up and said, let's join the military. Yeah. With a childhood friend. My dad had been a pilot, and I decided to go try something like that. But every company I worked at, I've always taken something away. And I think like the military took away was really around teamwork. Like, you can't get anything done without a team. And a lot of people that come out of the college and stuff, there's so much about the eye, or they don't understand how to work in these big team environments. So I took that away from the military. And then my first job out of college was a software developer at FedEx. And what I took away there is probably one of the most important lessons, in addition to the teamwork, is you have to get out behind your desk. You got to get out and understand the business. You have to know the business better than the business. And I spent an enormous amount of time out working with people that use our tools or our processes, and actually sit down with them and do their work. Like, I just do their job for like a half a day to see what it is.
Yeah, that's great.
And do that all over the place. Yeah. And the best way to do it is you show up unannounced. That's the key, because if you show up announced, there's some orchestration guaranteed set up where you'll come in and they're like, oh yeah, you want to go over and see this person. It's like, no, not really. I want to go find, like, just randomly pick somebody and sit with them and do their job. And that's really where you learn how to do the business. But every company I've worked at had a chance to take something away that I use, and a lot of them are built into some of these around, transparency, people being able to speak up. I think it's a key thing, where that's where a lot of the idea generation comes from. And then open debate's probably a big thing that I start to see more and more of, or companies trying to infuse, is how do you get open debate in the meeting so you make the decision to move on, versus nobody's having the debate because they don't want to offend their peers or anything like that. And then afterward it becomes passive aggressive, where everybody's shaking their head, and then when they leave, everybody's shaking it the other way, like, well, I'm not really sure about that. Yeah. Then you got to go back and have another meeting. So trying to get rid of a lot of that is just having the debate and letting people know if they can do that and they feel comfortable with it. And then the fail fast, which we talked about.
Yeah, awesome. All right, we have a couple more minutes, so I'd love to open it up for questions. Do we have microphones in the back for Q&A? Or are we just, okay. Anyone have a question for Clay? We have one here. There's a mic coming around.
You touched on it briefly, but how are some of those startup acquisitions that you've made, some of those more digital native companies that you've acquired, how is that changing and influencing your culture?
Yeah, I think it's changing around the speed innovation. Like, how do we get things going a lot quicker and faster versus, taking too much time to think about it. It's kind of like, if you get 80% right, just kind of go. I think that's what a lot of the startups that have taught us. We bought all different sizes of the startups, and I would say that all the ones that we've same concept. It's really around the speed and how quick to market they have to get to, but also how do they, operate within guidelines to get that innovation out there and being able to will and try stuff out. And you're starting to see a lot of that now in Walmart with a lot of the things that we're doing. From could be grocery delivery, could be things we're trying out, like allowing the employees to go and deliver stuff on their way home.
Yeah.
We're just trying it out. Like, it's one of those
we've all
things.
had some interesting conversations about that.
Yeah, and I don't think we would have tried that out before we bought the startups. I don't think so. And I wasn't necessarily there, but that's just my view on it. But I do think that speed and willing to try things out is going to get us there.
Yeah, cool. All right, who else?
Somebody over here?
How do you prioritize new IT initiatives or just any major initiatives in general?
Yeah, we get a lot of them. Just flooded with. Yeah, we actually have a pretty decent prioritization process where a lot of it's tied to business case. So we're very focused on a business case, but you got to be careful and not let everything be driven by a number, because a lot of times things won't have a return, and they're actually a really good idea that you have to implement on top of the stuff that you deal with, legal, regulatory, and compliance. But there are a lot of things out there, and what we do now is, I mentioned earlier, we had this digital transformation office, led by our CEO. We're actually bringing the ideas in there to get cross-company visibility into prioritization that we should be working on across the whole company. So it's actually a big shift for us to do something like that. So now we're bringing them in and saying, hey, how do we prioritize the work, and is it important to the whole company? Is it important to just an area, segment, or a specific country? And that's the stuff that we're working on, investing heavily in different areas.
Great. Other questions for Clay? We got one way over there, Adam. Get some exercise.
Hi, the prior speaker, Ken Hughes, talked about a step change has arrived. There were 8 elements that he talked about. The 2 that I'd like to ask you about are customization and authenticity for Walmart. How are you dealing with those 2?
Yeah, he did have some interesting stories.
Yeah,
I'm glad you
great
didn't mention the Skype one there. I was like, So yeah, I think the customization is real, and I saw a lot of that actually when I was in Israel, getting a chance to look at a lot of the retail companies or retail innovation pieces. You're seeing more and more around the customization. I think as you start to see our launch of our new website coming out very soon, you're going to see a big shift into customization. I think it's boiling all the way down to individual customization, not just the site you develop, but I think he was showing the retail example, you can try on clothes, and he's like, oh, you're already at a rack, right? We saw a lot of that where people were looking at the customization where you could do scanning and then do virtual try-ons, and it's all on mobile. And I think I hit on a minute ago, it's mobile, AR, and VR. It's augmented reality and the virtual reality. It was unbelievable where you could take customization. So for example, I could be sitting here and it would take your iPhone out, and you could see yourself in different jackets or shoes or whatever sitting in the environment that you're actually in. So it transplant that world right back into where you're sitting and look at it and say, okay, this is what might look good when I'm doing X, Y, and Z. Like we could change, just the whole setup. So I think customization is going to get big. I'm not sure on the authenticity. I think it's, I think the customization for me is probably a bigger driver than that. That's just my view on that. But yeah, he had some interesting ideas overall. But that helped.
I think we have time for one or two quick ones.
Thank you. How do you get ideas within your organization fed up to the right people so that across the Walmart ecosystem, people feel that what they observe about customers makes a difference, and like that whole cultural thing?
Yeah, yeah, that's a massive problem in any company. That's what I was talking about, where we started on Workplace. We created a group there called Value Makers, where people could submit their own ideas.
Right.
And that allowed us to actually get those bubbled up. And I made a personal commitment to making sure that the ones that did get in there were worked on. Because if you put them in there and nobody does anything about them, it's going to be the end of it. But what we've done is we actually have shifted campaigns to about every 90 days. So we actually, like the first one was, the one we're working on right now is sustainability. We're big into what we call Project Gigaton. We're trying to take out the carbon, basically have a zero carbon footprint down the road. So during Earth Day, Earth Month, what we did is we said, hey, we want to launch a campaign around ideas purely tied to sustainability. And the amount of ideas that we got were unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, just, massive amount of things. Like we've rolled out a lot of the digitization of our paperwork. So we have trying to get rid of as much paper as we can across the company. And some of the companies that we're using, people had a ton of ideas like, oh, you can digitize all this paper and get rid of, 1 million print jobs a year.
Yeah,
It's
I
like,
can only
whoa,
imagine,
okay,
yeah.
that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to somebody executive sponsor the thing to make sure the work gets done. Just because people put ideas in there don't mean they're going to get done. But it was an interesting way to get the a central repository for the ideas. And the way we chose them was we allowed the people to vote on them. So it wasn't like me just randomly selecting out of the 210. And in there you can vote on them based on a lot of different ways. So we allowed people to vote, and the power of the people voted to the top 10, and then I down selected from the top 10.
Yeah, that's great. And socialize it across the organization afterwards so that
Big time.
everyone knows
We
you're
marketed
doing
it. Yeah, people saw that we're doing it. Now the idea generation on sustainability that we're doing, a ton of people are coming out across the company.
Yeah, that's great. Great. Okay, do we have one more quick one, and then we're going to have to wrap up? Adam, over here. Oh, there you go. Sorry.
I was wondering, who else do you look up to as leaders in innovation in the retail world as you look for inspiration across the industry?
Yeah, I don't look just actually I just don't look in retail. I think you actually got to look outside of retail to find out what other companies are doing innovation. I think if you live just in the environment that you're in, you might not see the forest for the trees. And I think you asked me earlier, it's like, well, Clay, you come out of manufacturing, how in the world did you get into retail? I still don't know. Probably, I think I tell my boss I'm probably not even qualified to do the job because I'm not a retail expert. He's actually, the other view around was, we don't want somebody in retail in this job. We actually want somebody not in retail because we want a completely different view on how do you actually use technology. And as I've had a chance to work at some great companies and work for great leaders, one of the things that I discovered is everywhere you go, the technology is pretty much the same. It's just how you use it. And then at the end of the day, the people are the differentiator. It's really the people and the team that you have that are going to make the difference. So I kind of, not that I don't look at retail a lot, because I do spend a lot of time looking at the partners out there, but I spend a lot of time actually looking outside of retail and seeing what's going on, like the startup companies, and spend a lot of time with just what I would put is in kind of the world-class company category that you read a lot about. They're really making progress across the board.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much
Yeah, thank you.
for sitting with us today.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Clay.